Ruth chapter 1, let's just read a few verses and pick up where we left off about chapter 12, chapter 11. It says, now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband. I can't retell the story, but here we are, Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, a great man of wealth, we corrected that, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Remember, Elimelech is Naomi's husband who has died. Naomi is a widow. Her daughter-in-law's name is Ruth. Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go to the field. They're back in Bethlehem. This is taking place now not in the land of Moab, but they're back in the promised land in Bethlehem, in the area of the tribe of Judah. Ruth tells Naomi, her mother-in-law, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. And Naomi said to her, go, my daughter. So she departed and she went and she gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. So we don't know what the relationship was between Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband, and Boaz, but it was a close relative, cousin, second cousin. It wasn't distant. They were close. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Ruth is in the field. We've talked about why she was in the field, that the farmers weren't to harvest the corners of their crops. They were to leave that for the poor, the widows, the destitute, the orphans. That was the welfare system in Jerusalem. And so Ruth had gone to reap there. And Boaz has come in. He's the owner of the field. Boaz came from Bethlehem and he said to the reapers, may the Lord be with you. And they said to him, may Yahweh bless you. Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? So Boaz has come in, I'm sure in Bethlehem, a small town, maybe even a village surrounded by fields. I'm sure that he recognized the people of the town, the poor, the widows, the orphans, who would normally come during the harvest season. But now there's a new girl here, a young girl, a Moabitess, and he recognizes her. At least takes notice of her, and he wants to know who she is. So he asks one of his farmhands, who is this girl? And this was the answer of the farmhand. The servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. So remember, what his response to Boaz is, she's a Gentile. She's not one of us. She's a Gentile from Moab, but she's a good Gentile. She's not only a Moabite, but she's the one who returned with Naomi. And the story had gotten out, Ruth's kindness to Naomi, as we're about to see. He continues talking about Ruth. He said, and she said, when she came here, she approached me this morning, and she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She's been sitting in the house for a little while. So he tells Boaz she's a kind and humble woman. She understands authority. She didn't just barge into our fields. She came and found me who was in charge and asked me if she could reap here, if she could take the gleanings, the leftovers that the farmers had missed or left behind. And she's a hard worker. Since the moment she got here, she's been working. She just now took her first break. This is what the servant is telling Boaz about this young girl, Ruth, that he has not met yet. And so here we see the impact of a righteous character. What the farmhand has just explained to Boaz is this woman, this Moabite, this young lady who returned with Naomi, this woman is a virtuous woman. He just explained her in a couple of lines as a woman of righteous character. Hardworking, honest, authority-oriented, a wonderful woman. And the impact that character had on Boaz is instant. Look what it says in verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this field, but stay here with my maids, with my female servants that are picking the fields. He continues in verse 9, let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Not only did he provide for her well-being and for Naomi's well-being by giving her the opportunity to reap with his farmers, but he goes on in protection of her physically. He said, indeed, I have commanded the servants, not the girls that I want you to follow along with and pick. I've commanded the men. He says, I've commanded the servants not to touch you. Remember, in the land of Moab, or in the land of Canaan here during the period of Judges, we're about to see it in Judges chapter 19, 20, and 21. Israel was a disaster morally. An immoral land. Sexual immorality, idolatrous sexual immorality was rampant in Israel. So Boaz has to protect Ruth, this pretty young Moabite woman, from the servants. And so he says, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. And he goes on, he says, when you're thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. So he's taken her from having to glean in the corners of the field to giving her the water that his hired servants drink. He continues to provide for her as this conversation continues. Not only for her well-being, but for the food she'll eat, for the water she'll drink, etc., and for her physical protection. And now we see the impact of the righteous character of Boaz on Ruth. The things that he has just presented himself as to her, a man kinder than any that she would have ever expected to meet. All she wanted to do was go to the farmer's field and pick a few ears of grain that were missed by the farmers and go back home to her mother-in-law Naomi. And here all of a sudden Boaz, this Jewish man, has shown up and just altogether rolled out the red carpet for her, the impact of his righteous character on her. Seen in verse 10, she fell on her face, she bowed to the ground, and she said to him, why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner, a Gentile, a non-Jew? Who am I that you would take notice of me and do for me what you've told me that you would do? And here we have it flipped again, the impact of the righteous character of Ruth in her first statements to Boaz. Not only what the servant told him about her was true, but she in her humility has said, I'm unworthy of what you're doing for me. Why are you doing this? And he responds with yet more humility and kindness to her. It's just a beautiful interaction, a first meeting. You can't get a better first impression or a first meeting than you have right here with Ruth and Boaz. He replied to her question, why? He answers her, all that you've done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, my cousin, my close relative, all that you've done for this Jewish woman, Naomi, after the death of my close relative has been fully reported to me. I know who you are. I know the choices you've made, and you are an honorable, virtuous woman. That's why. Because of your sterling character. That's why I'm treating you this way. How you left your father and your mother in the land of Moab. You left the land of your birth and you came to a people, the Jews, that you did not previously know. She gave up everything to follow Naomi because she wanted to take care of Naomi, her mother-in-law. Ruth knew that there would be no one to take care of Naomi. Ruth knew that as an elderly widow, an older widow at least, Naomi would have nothing in the land of Canaan. She'd have nothing in Bethlehem, and Ruth wanted to take care of her mother-in-law the best way she knew how. So she left her land, she left her mother and her father, and more importantly, she left her gods, the foreign false gods of Moab, and she went to Israel, following Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In verse 12, Boaz continues to speak to her, and he says, may Yahweh reward your work, all that you've done in sacrifice for my cousin's widow. I'll call him cousin, it seems appropriate. All that you have done for my cousin's widow, may God reward you for all that you've done for her. And may your wages be full from Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Boaz understands that Naomi has come into Israel to seek refuge under the wings of Israel's God, Yahweh. This is what this phrase means, a couple of words here. Under whose wings is this word kanaf, K-A-N-A-P-H. And if you put an A-I-M on the end of this, it's not a plural I-M. When you add A-I-M, it means two. There's a way to say two things in Hebrew, and it's I-M. So it's kanafayim. That's the word. Kanafayim is the word that he uses. The two wings of God is what he says. What he's speaking here of the wings, and what Naomi is seeking in Israel is refuge or shelter under God's wings. Boaz recognizes that Ruth has done all these things for Naomi and come into Bethlehem seeking the refuge and shelter of the God of Israel, not the God of Moab, the God of Israel. She's abandoned the gods of Moab and her mother and her father's house and their traditions, and is in Israel seeking the worshiping the one true God, Yahweh. And Boaz understands it clearly. Kanafayim, the two wings of a bird. Interesting, I'll tell you something else about that in just a moment, but the way that birds care for their young, a couple of pictures here, is a very, very tender thing. God has designed a bird to protect its young with its wings, either on top of its wings or under its wings. There's psalms that speak about eagle's wings. When an eagle teaches its young bird, its young birdling, what's the word? Eaglet? What's the word for a young eagle? When an eagle teaches its young bird to fly, you know how they do it? They push it out of the nest and it starts to fall. And it's like a do or die situation. They throw it into the deep end of the pool. But if you don't know, eagles make their nests on the sides of cliffs. The bird has a long way to go on its way down to the ground. And the mother bird is always underneath with its wings ready to catch the little bird. And you see this in nature and videos, that the eagle will catch the little bird that's trying to fly on its wings, take it back up, repeat the process. This is how God has designed for some birds to learn how to fly. Sometimes mama provides the shelter, the protection on top of her wings. Often it's under her wings. Jesus took up this motif. Jesus said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks, under the protection of Messiah, under the wing of protection that only the God Messiah could provide for Israel. This is what Jesus wanted to be for Israel, the chosen people, the people of God. The last statement he makes in that verse in Matthew 23 is, but you were unwilling. So this motif, this vision of of a bird caring for its young, is used throughout the scriptures of the way God cares for his people. Not only Israel, but all of us, either on top of his wings or underneath the protection of his wings. So Boaz says here, you, Ruth, have left everything you've known and have come to seek the shelter of Almighty God. Bravo. Perfect move. It's interesting because in just a minute, as we'll not tonight, but when we get to it in Ruth chapter 3, Ruth will use this imagery again with Boaz. And she will say in Ruth chapter 3, verse 9, he will say, who are you? She'll go into his chambers and uncover his feet. And she answered, I am Ruth your maid. Spread your covering over your maid. It's a Hebrew idiom for taking her in marriage. You're the one that can marry. You're the closest relative to my father-in-law and my dead husband Mahlon. You're the one that can take me as a levir in levirate marriage. You're the one that can redeem my father-in-law and my husband's properties, etc., and his name. And this word kanafayim comes up again. Spread your covering, your kanafayim. Spread your two wings over me, Boaz, for you are a close relative. So Boaz says, you have come seeking the shelter of Almighty God. and you should be commended for it. And Ruth very soon will turn back to him and say, God is providing for me through you, if you will only spread your wings over me. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. In verse 13, let's pick up Ruth chapter 2, verse 13. Then she said, I have found favor in your sight, my Lord. Look at all the things that she tells him he did for her. You have comforted me. And indeed, you have spoken kindly to me, your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. And more humility from Ruth here. She thanks Boaz for even taking notice of her, a Gentile, a foreigner in the field. She thanks him for comforting her. She thanks him for speaking kindly to her. Boy, is it not the little things? Even though she herself considers herself not worthy of anything that he's giving her, she's not even a Jew. I'm not like one of your maidservants. I'm lesser than your field hands. I'm nothing. I'm a Gentile widow who's wandered into the land of Israel. I don't deserve anything you're giving me. At mealtime, it just keeps getting better and better, this story. It's so rich. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, so she's left the break she was on. She's gone back into the fields. She's worked until mealtime, and Boaz says to her, come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece in the bread, your piece of the bread in the vinegar. And look what it says after this. So he's invited her to the table of the workers, not the poor, the outcast, the downtrodden, the widows, the orphans, not them who would eat from whatever they brought. But he invites her to the table. And look what it says. So she sat beside the reapers, and he, Boaz, served her, Ruth. The one who says, I'm lesser than anybody in your fields. And here the field owner is serving this young Moabite woman. He served her roasted grain. So not only did she eat the bread with the wonderful vinegar that they had, but he actually personally served her the roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied. And he saw to it when he served her that she had an abundant supply, more than she could eat. There was some left over. Why did he do that? Somebody tell me, why did Boaz fill her plate with more food than she can eat, knowing that she would have to take some of this home? Why did he do that? For whom did he do that? For Naomi. For Naomi. He sent the leftovers home for his cousin's widow, Naomi. Listen, you may have the tendency in this story to think, oh, Boaz is moving in on Ruth. He likes what he sees. That's not what this story's about. That's not what this story's about at all. This is a kind, obedient Jewish man whose close relative's widow has come into town, and he is caring for her in the best way he knows how. He's giving her everything he can. Has nothing to do with attraction, none of that. That's not in this picture. We'll see that as the story continues, that it doesn't have anything to do with that. He is showing her the love of God, the love that God shows him in filling his fields with grain, the generosity that God shows towards Boaz. He's simply imitating God and showing that same love and compassion and empathy and provision for this young woman, Ruth, and his relative's widow, Naomi. She had some left over. I want to say a couple of things before we move forward. Hospitality. Another reason he's doing this is because hospitality was very important in the ancient Near East. Understand, the land of Canaan is in what we call the Near East, not the Middle East, not the Far East. It's in the Near East geographically. And in the ancient Near East, in the Mediterranean Valley here, hospitality was very important to them. A good host prepared meals for visitors. I just want to show you a couple of verses to prove this, to show you that Boaz's hospitality, while not expected from Ruth, it was very important in the days in which they lived. I take you to Genesis chapter 19 for 3 verses. Remember this story? Angels have come to Abraham. The angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, visited Abraham with two other angels. They were all had the appearance of men when they visited Abraham. This is the story where Abraham says, "But Lord, if you find 50 righteous in Sodom, will you save them for 50?" And then he continues, "Let me speak just one more time. How about 45? How about 40? How about 30? How about 20? How about 10? Lord, how about 5?" This is the story. That negotiation has ended in the end of Genesis chapter 18, and in Genesis chapter 19, the two angels that were dispatched to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, they're on their way. We pick up the story there. The two angels came. We're talking about hospitality here. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot, this is Abraham's nephew, was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed down with his face to the ground. Because in the ancient Near East, hospitality was an important thing. Greeting people, inviting them into your home, making them meals, providing for them. Very important in the days in which they lived. The very next verse says, "And he said, Now behold, my lords," this is Lot speaking to these men, he thinks, who he will find out soon are angels. He says, "Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night." Doesn't even know the men, invites them into his home all night. "Wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, however, "No, but we shall spend the night in the square." Remember what, I can't tell the story, but the square was not a safe place from the sexual deviance in Sodom. But this is what it says in the very next verse. "Yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him, and they entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate." So hospitality was big in those days. It was expected, but not to Ruth. Ruth was overwhelmed by the hospitality, the kindness that Boaz showed to her, a Gentile, one of the poor who had simply come into his field to glean. Very different. Verse 15, back to the Ruth story, chapter 2. "When she arose to glean, Boaz commanded his servant, saying, 'Let her glean.'" It just continues to get better for her in the eyes of Boaz. She rose to glean. She'd eaten. She didn't say, "This is wonderful, I think I'll take a little nap." She ate. She immediately went back to work. Hard-working woman. When she rose to glean and she's gone from Boaz, he turns to his servants and has more commands for them. "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her." So Ruth has walked away from the table, as I said, and Boaz has these commands for the men. "She will take from the first fruits of my field, the best. What I would take to market is available to her free of charge." She's not gathering for me as one of my hired hands. She's gathering for herself and my cousin's widow. She will take from the first fruits. He also tells them not to insult her. It's a Hebrew word that means to humiliate or cause to feel shame. Don't put this lady down. Don't touch her. Don't insult her. Don't humiliate her. Don't make her feel ashamed for what she's doing. You act like she's not even there. You just give to her. Verse 16, he keeps going. It gets better in his abundant care for this woman. "Also, you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from your bundles." So here are these men picking these heads of grain and putting them in sacks for Boaz so he can eventually take them to market and sell them. And he tells them, "You take from your sack while you're putting in, every now and then take a couple of handfuls and drop them on the ground for Ruth to come and pick up." Not only will she work for herself and pick up what she takes, but you will work for her and leave for her some of your gleanings. An amazing little bit of love. Purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles. Leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. He's risen Ruth in an afternoon, a very, very short afternoon of conversations. Ruth has risen in his mind. And because of her character, what she's willing to sacrifice in love for her mother-in-law, and in keeping in himself keeping the Mosaic law and obeying God and doing what he was supposed to do, he has gone way beyond what God ever asked him to do in his care for this woman. And here we go. I asked the question, or at least I heeded the warning. I gave you a warning to heed, to not to think that Boaz is trying to make out with Ruth here. He's not trying to impress her. He's not trying to win the woman. This is not what he's doing at all. It's not what this story's about. So what becomes Ruth's or Boaz's motivation? We should ask the question, then why is he doing it? Remember what it says. We've gone over this. I just want to show it to you again. We go on. Boaz replied to her, all that you've done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has fully been reported to me. How you left your father, your mother, the land of your birth, came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full. Your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Ruth has come to Israel seeking the refuge in Yahweh's arms, either above Yahweh's wings or under Yahweh's wings, and Boaz knows it. And so here we have Boaz, a man of God, a servant of God, a servant of Yahweh, sharing with Ruth what Yahweh has given him. It's a beautiful picture. God provides for us. We provide for others. He's simply living a Jewish life in a proper way. He's an obedient Jew during the period of the Judges. He's obeying the Mosaic law. He's being kind. He's being generous. All of those things that the Word says. He's taking care of the widow and the orphan. He's doing all of these things that he's supposed to do. He's simply going above and beyond. The kindness that he's shown is beyond the letter of the law. And so we go on with the story in verse 17. It says, so she gleaned in the field until evening. Imagine what she's taking now. She's taking from the corners of the field. She's taking from the first fruits, the sheaves. She's picking up what the farm hands are dropping on the ground for her. I mean, she's gathering all kinds of grain. So barley. She gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. This is a 30-pound sack of barley that she has gathered in one day. 30-pound sack of barley. Unheard of for a poor person to gather such an amount of barley in a day. 30 pounds, just imagine what 30 pounds of anything is. 30 pounds of rice, that'll feed you for a long time. Days and days and days. She's gotten several days' worth of food in one day's gleaning in the field of this man Boaz. Enough food for several days. She took it up and she went into the city. So now she has her 30 pounds of processed barley, and she gets to go to her mother-in-law Naomi. She took it up and she went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also took it out and she gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. Remember the lunch leftovers? Boaz not only provided for Ruth, but he provided the evening meal for his cousin's widow, Naomi. She ate the leftovers from Ruth's lunch, the bread and the vinegar and the roasted grain. Her mother-in-law then said to her, where did you glean today? And where did you work? Astounded by the abundance of grain she brought home. Where did you glean today, and where did you work? And before she even knows in whose field she gleaned, she utters a prayer for the man. May he who took notice of you be blessed. I don't know who it is, but he showed you unnecessary kindness. There's no way you should have what you have in 30 pounds of barley. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, Boaz, and she said, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he, now Boaz, she has a name, a farmer's name, may he be blessed of Yahweh, who has not withdrawn his kindness, has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and to the dead. Who are the dead she's talking about? Who are the dead that Boaz has shown kindness to? His cousin and his cousin's 2 sons that are all dead. He's caring for their widows. That is showing kindness to them. Not only to those who remain and are alive, Naomi and Ruth, but also Boaz's kindness is to her husband, Elimelech, and to Ruth's dead husband, Mahlon. Naomi said to her, the man, Naomi, a good Jewish woman, as we'll see as we get into Ruth chapter 3 next time, she goes from being this embittered woman who thinks God has turned against her and stripped her of every blessing. She comes back into town. She says, no longer call me pleasant. Don't call me by my name Naomi, which means pleasant, but call me bitter now. Call me Marah, because God has dealt bitterly with me. And all of a sudden, when she hears that God has put Ruth in Boaz's field, all the light bulbs start going on. And the matchmaker comes out in Naomi. And in Ruth chapter 3, what we're about to see is she goes into full-on Jewish matchmaker mode. Tries to get these two together, Ruth and Boaz. She's got it figured out now. Naomi said to her, this man is our relative. I wish I could do a good Jewish female voice because I can see this man is our relative. Not only our relative, this is one of our closest relatives. It's a good thing. Closest relative translates a word that you have to know. It's the word Goel. Goel. She calls him a relative, and then she says, this man is a redeemer of our family. He is a redeemer of my husband's family, Elimelech's family. This man, Boaz, is a close enough relative that he can be a Levir. He can be the one who marries you to continue the name of my son Mahlon, who's died. He can redeem you. Remember this Goel, the kinsman redeemer, as we know him as. He is a kinsman. He's a family member who is qualified to redeem for the family. I'll give you an example. If someone were incarcerated, say Boaz had a brother that was a bad seed, went south of the law, got incarcerated. Boaz could step in and redeem the land that his brother had lost because of his legal problems. Boaz had the authority in the family to buy that land to keep it in the family name. He could do that. He had first rights to these things. He was the family's, clan's redeemer. He was also the family's avenger. So say Boaz had a brother, in another example, and that brother was murdered by someone. The families also had a kinsman avenger, this Goel. And it would have been up to Boaz to find the murderer and to kill him. He not only was a redeemer of name and property and all of those things, he was also the family avenger. That's the way it worked in Israel. So this man, Ruth knows, is able to redeem our family's good name and our property and our inheritance in Bethlehem. They've been gone for 10 years, remember. So that's what she starts to have in her head, that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. How fortunate that God has brought you into Boaz's field. This will be good for you, daughter. So, Ruth chapter 4, verse 10. Just a verse to look forward. Maybe Boaz, Naomi starts to think, the mother-in-law, maybe Boaz would be willing to act as a levier and redeem the name of my deceased husband and my deceased son, Mahlon. And that's exactly when we get to the end of the story, what we'll see that Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer of the family of Naomi. This is Boaz speaking in Ruth chapter 4, verse 10. He says, "Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to," there's a reason that he's done this. Not only has he fallen for this woman over this time, but there's a reason why he takes the wife, he says, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. My dead family member, my close relative, Elimelech, that's died, I will raise up through the son of Ruth the name of my deceased so that his inheritance will continue. So the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. That's what this levirate marriage was all about. This is what the Sadducees questioned Jesus about. If a woman has a husband, he dies, she marries his brother, he dies, she marries the next brother. This happened 7 times. In heaven, whose husband will she be? Because they don't believe in resurrection, and Jesus gives the story of in heaven, they're like the angels. You're not given in marriage. Men and women aren't given in marriage in heaven. Marriage is only for this time in which we live. That was that idea of levirate marriage. She marries another brother, then she marries his brother, then she marries the next younger brother. That is the Jewish system that God set up, and that's exactly what Boaz would become. The kinsman, the close family relative, the Goel, the redeemer of Elimelech's name. His inheritance, his birthright, his name, all of those things would continue because of what he would do for Ruth. Then Ruth the Moabitess, verse 21, Ruth the Moabitess said, "Furthermore, he said to me," she continues telling Naomi what Boaz told her. He said, "You should stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest." And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids." She's encouraging Ruth to do what Boaz said to do. "It's good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids so that others do not fall upon you in another field. It's dangerous in Israel. So this is good that this man has taken you under his wing and provided for you and protected you. You could be harmed. Others could fall upon you in another field." In verse 23, it says, "So she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest." Remember, I told you the barley is harvested in March and April or so. The wheat, June and July. Look what it says. "She stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law." And there's a period at the end of chapter 2, and there's a question that has to be asked. What about now? There's no more grain in the field. The harvest is over. How's Ruth going to be provided for now, and how's she going to provide for Naomi? The harvest is over. So how is God going to provide for them in the next season? And that's when Naomi becomes the great matchmaker, the great Jewish matchmaker in the scripture, Naomi, in Ruth chapter 3. We'll pick it up there next time. Heavenly Father,